Welcome to the Awesome Dynamic Show. This is Paul DeWarian with Awesome Dynamic, the president and owner. Today I have with me Tim DeWarian. Tim, you want to say hello?
Hello.
He's coming to us from Chicago. We also have Blake Tintori with us. Blake, do you want to say hello?
Hello.
He's coming to us from Slovakia. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
We also have Phil, director or marketing coordinator, with us as well. Do you want to say hello, Phil?
Hello.
All right. Phil will be taking some notes. It'll go on our blog post. The Awesome Dynamic Show is where we go over some really valuable content and show you what you could be doing on Amazon. And today we're going to be covering how to start selling in Amazon Europe. And Tim and Blake have prepared a wonderful presentation for us today. And with that, I'm going to let us dive right into that content. And Tim is going to get us started. Tim.
Excellent. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Paul. All right. How to start selling in Amazon Europe. We're going to go over why would you want to sell in Europe, the different fulfillment options, the 4 L's. We'll go over that more. And, okay, where do I start? So we'll go over all that through the course of this presentation. So without further ado, let's start. Okay, Tim, why do I want to sell in Europe? All right, well, let's start with that there's millions of new organic customers that are in the European Union. You know, it's a brand new marketplace, and I think a lot of American based companies or US based companies oftentimes look for, you know, possibly expanding into Canada first or Mexico or somewhere close by where, you know, it would be easier to ship and import than going overseas. But one thing that you have to really realize is that Canada as a country has about the same population as California. You know, it's not that big. And Europe, as opposed to that, it's significantly bigger. It's going to be a much better return on investment if you look at going towards Europe as opposed to Canada, just based on that fact alone. So, okay, the other thing is people think it's complex to sell in Europe, but the great thing is, much like how in the US we have a unified account now that covers all of North America, so you can, you know, easily sell across to Canada and Mexico and the United States. Europe has something similar. They have a unified account for Europe as well, so it actually is really easy to sell along all of their different marketplaces. And just so you know, the marketplaces that exist in Europe are UK, Germany, France, Spain, and Italy. So even though the marketplaces are in those 5 countries, citizens in all of Europe will purchase from one of those 5 marketplaces. So someone in Belgium may buy off of France or Germany. Someone in, well, Blake is in Slovakia, they may choose to buy from Italy or Germany, since those are probably the 2 closest, etc. So it's not just it isn't just available to the people in these countries. It's just that these are where the marketplaces are centered around.
Tim, quick question. I'm going to try and keep it limited because, as you said, we have a lot of content to cover. Are those the only countries that the warehouses, the FBA warehouses, exist in?
Yes, that's correct.
Great, thank you.
Yep. All right. The other thing to keep in mind about Europe and why you might want to sell there is because in certain categories, there's actually a lot less competition. So something that may be very saturated here in the United States may be a lot less saturated out there in the US or out there in Europe. So that might be a huge advantage to think about doing out there in Europe. There's also the advantage of being able to test with small quantities when you go over to Europe. A lot of people think it's going to be a huge investment. I got to ship all this inventory out there just to see how it does. But with all the different fulfillment options that we're going to go over later, it really is easy to have a small test shipment just to check the viability of whatever product you want to start selling over there. So it's not as big of an investment as many may think. And then lastly, before people start selling in Europe, they want to know, okay, with this whole Brexit thing going on, and you know, with Great Britain possibly leaving the European Union, how is that really going to affect this? And you know, is it still going to be worthwhile? to be quite honest, it's not a really simple, straightforward answer. As of right now, it's business as usual. Nothing really has changed as of yet. The UK is part of Europe still. It's still just like it was before, until they actually officially withdraw from the EU, which could actually take years for that to happen. It's really unclear what kind of effects that will actually have. So right now, it's one of those things where if you have been wanting to go in there, this really shouldn't change your mind about going to ship to Europe and starts fulfilling in Europe. It's still going to be one of those things where this won't have a really big impact right now. All right. Do you have any questions before we move on to the next section, which is talking about the different ways to fulfill in Europe?
I didn't have a question. I just wanted to point out that if Brexit ever does take effect and UK withdraws, if let's say your products are stored in the UK, it won't be too hard to, let's say, move that inventory from UK to Germany or France or Spain and Italy. So don't let this whole Brexit thing have too much of a scare effect on you.
Okay, that's a really great point, Blake. Yeah, it's been one of the biggest questions that we've gotten, and want to make sure we address it, and let you know, like Blake said, it's not that big of a deal. Nothing is happening with it yet, so continue with business as usual. All right, so moving right along. Okay, so what are the 5 different ways that you can fulfill in Europe? We've talked many times about using FBA and the advantages it can have over self-fulfilled options. And with in Europe, there's actually a total of 5 different ways that you can fulfill orders in Europe. 2 options are seller fulfilled, so that's where you get orders and then you fulfill the orders yourself. You can either do seller fulfilled from the US, or you can actually do seller fulfilled from the EU. We're going to go into a lot more details in these in a moment, and we'll describe the how they work, advantages and disadvantages of each program. But if you wanted to do fulfillment by Amazon, they actually have 3 different options for this. So one is the FBA European Fulfillment Network, or EFN. There's the FBA Pan-European fulfillment option. And then we have the FBA Multi-Country Inventory, MCI. So before we get started diving into each of these individually, are there any other questions?
It's not the MCI, that's the old phone company, right?
No, not that I'm aware of, at least.
All right. All right, let's I'm excited to learn about it. Let's get going.
Right on. All right, so seller fulfilled from the US. Okay, so what is this all about? Basically, you hold stock in the US just like you are right now with if you do self-fulfilled in the US. Then what happens is you ship product from the US when an order is received. So that means international shipping for every single order. So what are the pros of doing something like that? It is a relatively low-cost option to get started, to be able to start fulfilling over in Europe. The other thing is, since it's self-fulfilled, you only pay that referral fee, which is a percentage of the sale for each product that's purchased. No need to pay any kind of FBA fees or anything else to Amazon. It's just that referral fee. You also don't pay any VAT on the sale itself. Now the cons are a really long lead time. So
Tim, could you clarify VAT really quick?
Yes, VAT stands for value added tax. And we're actually going to go into a lot more detail on what VAT is all about a little bit later in the presentation.
Okay, thanks.
Absolutely. All right, so the cons are it's a really long lead time to be able to get shipments from the US over to the EU. The other thing is that you can't make it's not Prime eligible because it's self-fulfilled. You can't, and it's takes such a long time to be able to get to the EU. You can't get any kind of Prime eligibility with that. Even though that VAT is not charged on the sale, The VAT does get charged on imports, which means that the person who's receiving the product may be responsible for paying that VAT as opposed to the seller. So because of all of that, you risk a lot of poor customer service because of the long shipping times, the customs issues, the VAT issues, all of that. So Amazon is really, really big on customer service. And if you want to be customer service oriented, this really may not be the best option to go with.
Now, one point there that I'd like to bring up, and I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm right, is that the VAT in other countries, it's not like here in the United States where they tack on the tax after the price. The price that you see is supposed to include the tax that you're about to pay, not be a certain price and then have tax added on afterward. And that's a cultural difference between us and a lot of other areas in the world. And Tim, can you verify that that's true?
Yes, that is absolutely correct. The Europeans are used to seeing, like, if they go to a restaurant or they're at a store, they see a price on the menu or on the price tag. They expect that that's exactly how much they're going to spend on that product. They don't calculate an extra percentage for taxes or anything on top of that.
Great. And that's something to be cognizant of when you're pricing. And that's the way we do it here. That doesn't mean that's the way they do it there. Great, Tim. Please continue.
All right. So I don't want to ship from the US. Let's say I want to do self-fulfilled from the European Union. So what this means is you hold stock in any EU country you want, and you ship products from within the EU. So the pros of doing it this way are that, again, you only pay the referral fee, no need to pay for any kind of FBA shipping. There's a shorter lead time, so when an order is placed, it actually get to the customer in a reasonable amount of time. Doesn't have to ship across seas or anything like that. Also, you may be eligible to be able to use the Seller Fulfilled Prime program. Seller Fulfilled Prime is a relatively new program that's also available here in the US for some sellers, where you will get that Prime sticker on your listing without having to use FBA. So you can still ship to the customer. The only thing is you have to pretty much guarantee that you have to get it to them within 2 business days. And that can really inflate the cost of your shipping. So something just to kind of keep in mind. All right. Then the other side of it, we have the cons. The big downside to be able to ship from the EU is, there's a really high setup and overhead costs. You have to set up a fulfillment center. You have to set up a warehouse, contract someone out to be able to fulfill third party for you if you don't have the ability to be able to do it yourself. So that's going to be something very important to keep in mind. Very expensive to get started. You also have to register for VAT in the country that your warehouse is located. So that's something where it's just a pain to be able to go through that process of registering and making sure it gets paid. Much like taxing here in the US, taxing is a very complicated process. And if you do want to use that Seller Fulfilled Prime, you have to actually apply to be able to use that Seller Fulfilled Prime. And a lot of customers in the EU, much like the US, some of them will look for that Prime sticker. And if you don't have it, then they may not be interested in purchasing your product. All right. Shall we move on to our FBA options?
We shall.
Excellent. Before I do, Blake, I know Blake was the one that did the majority of the research on all this and put this section of the presentation together. Was there anything that you wanted to add or comment on before we proceeded?
I almost interrupted you a couple times, but your knowledge is quite thorough and you've covered all bases. So swell job as always. Yes.
Yes, Tim, swell job.
Swell job. I like doing swell jobs. All right. All right. So the first option for doing FBA in Europe is the European Fulfillment Network, or EFN. All right. So what is EFN? That's where you ship and store your product in one European FBA warehouse. So you get to choose exactly where you want to ship it to. Then that warehouse will actually ship directly to customers across the EU. All right. So if I want to do that option, what are the pros of doing it? There's virtually no setup fees. You know, you don't have to set up a warehouse. You don't have to set up any kind of fulfillment network. You don't have to pay any kind of third-party logistics, anything like that in terms of, fulfilling orders. Fast delivery. You know, they are able to get the products to customers in a very quick manner because it is being shipped from the EU. It also allows your product to become Prime eligible, which is pretty straightforward. That's pretty much the case with every single FBA product out there, or FBA fulfilled product. And oftentimes, this kind of goes back to that first bullet point. FBA fees are generally lower than third-party logistics options in Europe. So definitely some great reasons to go for it. What are some of the downsides? First is that they're, getting back to the whole idea of customs, there are cross-border fees that you have to take into account. And that's very dependent on which country it's being sent from and to. And, there's just a lot of detailed information that you need to figure out to, get an accurate idea of how much you're spending in terms of fulfillment. The other thing is that you do have to register for VAT, even though it's only in the one country. You only have to actually register for VAT in the country where your product is being shipped from. So in this case, you only have to do it in your home marketplace. However, this kind of goes back to the fast delivery. It's fast delivery for the customers who purchase in the country where your product is located. But if it's a non-home country and they order a Prime product, it can take up to 3 days extra for the product to be able to arrive to the customer.
So meaning you ship to the warehouse in the UK,
Yep.
and someone in Germany orders from the UK warehouse, then it could be 5 days instead of 2.
That's correct.
Great.
Okay, so the other option, which is kind of the next step, is the FBA Pan-European option. And that's where you still send the inventory to one FBA warehouse that you choose. So you can send it to just the UK warehouse. Then what will happen is Amazon will redistribute your inventory across the network closer to where they think that the inventory should be located. So they use algorithms and other information to determine where they think the most demand is located. Okay, so what are the pros of doing this? Again, lower FBA fees because you're not shipping as far as you would with the other options. So it will not looking at any of those cross-border fees or anything like that in most situations. It's also lower inbound shipping because you're only shipping from the U.S. to one location. You're not having to go to multiple different locations with your inventory. You just go to one, then Amazon redistributes for you. Once again, going back to the whole FBA fees thing, it's no cross-border fees if you choose this option. And it's fast delivery in all marketplaces, not just in the home marketplace. Sorry, Blake, go ahead.
No, you can finish that last one. I wanted to speak before you get into the cons.
Okay, yeah, for sure. So the last item is, this does make your product Prime eligible, which is, again, very, very important.
Yes.
Blake, what'd you want to comment on?
So I just wanted to point out that the Pan-European fulfillment option it's one of the newer ones, and Amazon's pushing quite, I wouldn't say tough, but they are suggesting that this is the best route for most people who want to fulfill by Amazon. And it actually has the most pros and the least amount of cons. When we get into the final one, I'll compare and contrast, but essentially the cross-border fees can be quite pricey depending on which country it's going into. It's always different, but a lot of sellers are not aware that when you send your product to one distribution center, a lot of times they think that they, as a seller, have to pay for the redistribution. Amazon takes care of all that. There's no extra charge, and they can ship from distribution center to distribution center quite quick. So this is easier usually for the seller, and it's becoming easier for Amazon, and this is why they are actually starting to suggest and push that this is the fulfillment network you use for many reasons. And those cross-border fees could be, like I said, quite pricey. So this saves a lot of time, a lot of money, and makes everything quite simple.
All right. Yeah, that's some great points.
And I'll just hop on that as well. I'm sure your 4 L's are going to elaborate on why you would choose one over another. Is that correct, Tim?
Yeah, it definitely helps with your decision making. You know, which one you really want to do. You know, there's a lot of things to take into consideration other than just the fulfillment options, and some of those will impact which option you decide on.
Great. All right, Tim, let's see the cons.
All right, so why may you not want to do FBA Pan-European? First is inconsistent FBA fees, since every marketplace is different in terms of fulfillment costs and in terms of storage costs and everything else. It's sometimes hard to, be consistent or stay consistent with all your accounting. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing is you have to actually register your VAT in multiple countries. So if you have your inventory in a certain country, you're going to have to register VAT in that particular country.
Yes. One thing I'd like to point out is that companies that operate at quite tight margins, this con of inconsistent FBA fees is sometimes a hindrance. But we'd also like to point out that the percents are not high. It's usually a couple percent points that are the differences in FBA fees. So unless you're operating at really extremely tight margins, although it is a con, it's not a huge difference in percentiles.
All right, great points. All right, so the last fulfillment option is the FBA Multi-Country Inventory, or MCI. So this option is where you basically send inventory to multiple FBA fulfillment centers yourself across the many different countries that Amazon operates these fulfillment centers in. All right, so if we decide to go that route, the pros are, lower FBA fees, so lower than a lot of third-party logistics, and, usually we'll get to the customer faster. Control where inventory is located. So instead of Amazon deciding where your inventory should be, you actually get to decide where the inventory is going to go. There's no cross-border fees, and offers free, fast prime delivery because you are available in all the different marketplaces. Well, whichever ones you put the inventory in, for sure. Okay, so what's not so great about it? Well, first is that you generally look at higher inbound costs because it's up to you to be able to make sure that once the product gets shipped overseas, that it gets distributed to the different warehouses. So that either would be you creating individual shipments that go overseas to each warehouse directly, or you have to pay some kind of third-party logistics service to be able to divide up and redistribute your inventory. So, since Amazon takes care of that with that Pan-European option, that's something that is on you this time around to be able to distribute the inventory to where it needs to go. The other thing is, just like before, inconsistent FBA fees. So it may be different in each country and each marketplace. And lastly, VAT registration in multiple countries, just like the Pan-European one. All right.
Question on that, Tim.
Yes.
In this model, the MCI model, does Amazon, I noticed the one piece that was on the prior slide that's missing from this one, is Amazon is not redistributing your product between the warehouses. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So if I want to move something from the UK warehouse to Germany, do I need to recall it back to the United States and then send it into Germany?
That's an excellent question.
You will not you'll need a third party to do that and essentially a distribution center or a warehouse to withdraw, because Amazon does not send any products from in terms of removal of your inventory from Europe back to the United States. Granted, you can ship it in, you cannot ship it, you cannot do removal orders, or you cannot do removal orders. So you need to look into either refurbishing or having a third-party warehouse or distribution center that Amazon can send that to somewhere in the European Union.
So you need an intermediary, someone to handle that for you, some sort of logistical partner, strategic partner to help you with that there.
Correct. And the MCI, the multi-country inventory fulfillment option, overall, and is mostly for companies that know exactly where they want to be. They know that their niche product or service might be garden tools, and that they're going to be in the UK primarily, and that they don't see any reason to do that in, let's say, Germany or Spain, where 50% of all residents are like apartments, whereas in the UK, a lot of residents are houses and they have gardens. So these are the MCIs typically for people who generally really, really know their market, know where they want to break in, and know where their sales are most likely going to be. And usually when people or Amazon compares the MCI versus the European, is that you don't know who's going to buy your product in the Pan-European, and you know exactly who's going to buy it with MCI. So you prefer to distribute your stock accordingly.
That's a great explanation, Blake. Thank you for bringing that up. So Tim, would you bring up the next slide? And we're going to do a little commercial break here.
Absolutely. So once we come back, we'll start talking about those 4 big L's: the language, localization, logistics, and legislation.
All right. And Tim, please pull up our awesome dynamic website for a moment.
Absolutely.
Terry, who's our director of sales, usually does this piece, but I'm going to take a crack at it since I haven't done it in probably months, but I think I could handle it. Awesome Dynamic is your preferred and premier Amazon consultant and management partner. Not only are we coming up very prominently for anything regarding Amazon consulting and management all over Google internationally, but we are also very good at, and our roots come from doing website design and search engine optimization as well. This is something where we have a firm of 15 people, and we're growing very rapidly. As you can see on this webinar, we're located all over the place as well. We're a virtual company, but we're also very good. And that's why we always tell folks that we connect with to Demand Awesome. If you're interested in these webinars and would like to see more, you can register for those webinars right on our homepage, or you can go to the webinar button at the top right. You can always watch the past webinars there as well. We also have tremendous blog content with lots of valuable information, and you can also get to that in the top right of the website. Just click on that blog button. Lots of great information for small business, regular size business, for SEO, search engine optimization, or Amazon related topics as well. We're constantly creating content and videos and just really valuable information on a weekly basis, so people can use that information to better themselves online in some form, way, or fashion. You can also sign up for our awesome list. You can see when you're in the blog section on the left there, there's a section to do so. Also on our homepage, if you scroll down, midway down the page, there's an awesome list sign up as well. That gets you on our mailing list so we can notify you of these great blogs and webinars that we have on a weekly basis. That being said, if you enjoyed this webinar, we encourage you to go down to the bottom of our website where there is a Review Us button and give us a 5-star review as a thank you for getting you this great content that is going to help you out. We would really appreciate that. That's going to help us connect with even more customers and become more successful. And we would love for you to do that if you found this information valuable. With that being said, I'm going to turn it back to Tim. We're going to learn about those 4 L's, right, Tim?
That is right, Paul. All right.
Let's do a full intro on that. So, Tim, tell us what 4 L's means.
So like I said before, it stands for language, the importance of language when moving over to the European Union. Localization, knowing your particular markets and how to localize your listings accordingly. Logistics, how you got to get stuff back and forth to the EU, and wanted to go over anything having to do with the cost of doing business. And then lastly is legislation, all the important legal information. So it's everything from laws to VAT. We were talking about VAT earlier. All that information will be in that portion. All right. So without further ado, let's move on. First 4 L's is language. So Amazon, there's many different marketplaces in the EU. It's important to make sure that if you decide to make your product available in all 5 different marketplaces that we went over earlier, and again, that's the UK, Spain, France, Italy, and Germany. I remember that from without having to look at it. So it's important to make sure that if you decide to branch out and make your product available in all the different marketplaces, that you have all your listing pages translated properly. The nice thing is Amazon does actually provide a certain level of assistance in this area if you want them to help. There are sometimes fees associated with that, but something that you have to make sure you keep in mind about that. And by making sure that you take the time to do proper translations, it does help a lot with conversions. I'm sure many people have seen in the US there have been some foreign sellers who create listings in the US and it just has broken English and doesn't seem to really make much sense, and it really turns you off from wanting to buy that product. So think of the same thing in reverse. You really want to make sure you nail down those translations. The other thing is you have to keep in mind that in addition to being able to sell the product to customers, you also have to provide a certain level of customer service to them as well. And if you have someone in Germany that wants help with their product or has an issue, they will message you in their native language, most likely, and you'll have to respond in kind and have to be able to support them in that in their native language. I know a lot of sellers who try to use translation apps and websites with varying degrees of success, I would say. But I'm sure many people don't have multilingual people on staff that can always respond to these. But there are a lot of different options that you can look into to help you with this.
I would like to point out that Amazon also offers translation services. So in Europe, so it's probably cheaper than most third-party sites. I don't know the exact figures, but when you can trust their fulfillment centers and their networks, I probably would trust their translation services as well. They probably source out a third party, but yes, language is quite important. The more things you translate and make easier to read for the customer, the better.
Excellent point. And this just kind of reiterates that you have to provide customer service in the customer's native language. And one advantage if you decide to do FBA is FBA does take care of a lot of the customer service for you for fulfillment options or issues, but you will still need to sometimes respond to some issues yourself. So that pretty much covers the language portion of it. I want to move on to the next section, which is about localization. So somewhat tied to language, each country, not only do they have different languages, but they have different, even in the UK, they speak English. It'd probably be easy for you to be able to work with you. But you have to keep in mind that there are different currencies in all these different countries. So just to give a quick example, the two main currencies that you would be dealing with in Europe is going to be the euro and the pound sterling. So the pound sterling, of course, is just in the UK, but most of the rest of Europe is all on the euro. So you're going to have to, you keep this in mind because there's all sorts of, what do I want to say, this conversion rates to keep in mind, to be able to convert from one currency into another one and then be able to have that, deposited into your account in the US. So there's, just something to keep in mind that you're going to get pretty familiar pretty fast with these different currencies. And like I said, foreign exchange costs, just like I was mentioning before. All right. So even if your product may do well in a certain category in the US doesn't mean it will do well in in the same category in the EU. So you want to kind of keep in mind that there are different categories and labeling for each of those. I think this is what we were trying to get at, is that there's different labeling that's sometimes required for different categories. Is that correct, Blake?
Correct. Amazon has essentially, because there are laws enforced in the European Union, that most toys, electronics, and I think it's medical devices, you're required to label how Amazon would like you to, and you clearly have to follow those rules. But the other categories that it's not required, it's still in your best interest to do these labels and translations, just because if you're not customer centric, you're going to be losing out on customers, and you're going to be out competed by companies that are doing that.
Very good points. All right. The other thing is the lexicon, the language that people use, even in the US, as opposed to what we use here or what's used in the UK versus what's used in the US. It's different. So when pants are not necessarily pants. I love that little phrase. I'll thank Phil for that one. Thank you. And so, for example, in the UK, they will oftentimes use the phrase underpants as opposed to we use the phrase underwear. They use the phrase lorry as opposed to us using the word truck. And just to help kind of drive the point home, there may be different keywords. So if you're looking for a particular category, or if you're looking for a particular keyword that you're trying to fill in there and you can't, for some reason it's just not working for you, make sure that you use the right one. In the UK, they call it a bin bag as opposed to a trash bag, as another example.
Just a quick question.
Absolutely, Phil.
I guess this would come under the category of localization, because it does concern the differences in it's not currency, but it concerns a metric difference, and that being of dimensional measurement.
Yes.
Do you think that, or is it important to, if I'm selling from the United States into Europe, to be able to, in my product descriptions, to provide the proper metric description?
Yes, but it's one of those things to keep in mind that there's not a whole lot of European customers who are buying in the US Amazon marketplace. There is an option. In fact, the US does have an option that you can enable in your US seller account called FBA Export, which allows Amazon to ship orders to customers who want to buy them outside of the US. But most European customers are going to be shopping in their local marketplace. So customers in Germany will be on Amazon.de. Customers in the UK will shop at Amazon.co.uk, etc. So when you create the listings for each of those different marketplaces, you'll want to make sure you localize, like what we were saying a little earlier, to what is proper for them. So you want to make sure in those particular listings you absolutely do everything in centimeters or meters, and do it in kilograms or grams, as opposed to doing it in feet and inches and in pounds.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Good question, by the way.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. All right. So next item is legislation. A couple items that we want to make sure about if you decide to sell your product in the EU is, do you have the rights to be able to sell that particular product in the EU? That's something where you have to do a lot of legwork to kind of figure out, work with a lawyer or an attorney to make sure that you understand what rights you have to be able to sell your product in that marketplace. The other thing is, let's say if you're distributing product, or let's say if you're buying wholesale from somebody, do your rights extend to allow you to sell in Europe? So you have to make sure you kind of stay up on the level with all of your manufacturers, your suppliers. And I think like maybe we were supposed to, maybe you want to expand a little bit more on that particular topic, the exclusive distribution rights. Was there anything else you wanted to add to that?
Uh, you covered most. Essentially, a lot of people are not aware that their manufacturer or primary distributor might have given exclusivity rights to a different company and they're selling in Europe, and then you'd be stepping on their toes or their territory legally, and they're not going to want that. So it just comes down to asking them, research, or have your lawyer or whoever is taking care of that just to make sure you're not stepping on anyone's toes. But you covered that well.
Excellent. All right, great. So this next item here, the CE markings, which stands for Consumer Electronics, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
That I did not realize, but I think that is correct. I'll look that up. Great question.
Well, according to my notes here, it's to cover toys, medical devices, low voltage electronics, where they need certain kinds of markings to indicate that they've been tested and that they pass certain requirements to be able to be sold in the UK or in the EU in general. So, yeah, I know that there's and kind of actually moving to the next point here is that the consumer rights that Europeans enjoy are a lot different than over here in the US. So, there are many warranty differences for warranties in the UK and in, I keep on saying UK, but it's all across the EU. The nice thing is that if you decide to ship via FBA, and Amazon will usually take care and cover any of those kinds of consumer rights issues that may crop up. But if you do sell FBM, you really have to do your homework and make sure that your product is compliant and make sure that you as a seller are compliant with all EU's laws when it comes to consumer rights. I think kind of reiterating on the last thing, the EU directives do apply to small electronic devices. So one big part of that is recycling and disposal laws. Those are very, very different than over here in the US, although I think the US is changing a lot of that too. But you want to make sure that if you do have old refurbished products or if you need to get rid of them, then you want to make sure that you do recycle them properly. Product compliance and restricted products. So each country has different compliance and restrictions. So the big category that really falls into that is the toys, medical devices, and certain electronics. And I also wanted to kind of point out that before we talked about CE means it actually means for
European conformity. I can't say it in French, but it's I was just gonna.
I'm not even gonna attempt it, but it's French for European conformity.
Correct.
So just wanted to go back and reiterate that point. And then the biggest thing that's going to affect everyone is VAT, value-added tax. So VAT is all about it's inclusive in the sale price, like we were saying before. It's not like here in the U.S. where the tax is going to get added on at the end of the sale. It'll actually be part of the sale price. You need to register for a VAT number in the EU. So it has to be in whichever country your product is located. So if you have your product located in just one country, then you have to make sure you register for VAT in that particular country. If you do it in multiple countries, you have to then register in each country that you are that you have your inventory in. You also have to file for VAT returns. You have to declare the sales tax and invoice your VAT for every single sale that you make. So a lot of logistics behind that. And we recommend that you consult with a tax attorney, someone who, or an accountant, a tax advisor. This way they can help you navigate this type of detailed information and make sure that you're covered and doing it properly. Because if you don't do this correctly, it would not be good. You want to be able to stay on the up and up and be able to sell on Amazon. And part of that is making sure that you follow the local laws. And I think that pretty much covers everything for the legislation section. Was there anything else that you wanted to add, Blake?
No, you covered that well. It just definitely hire a tax advisor unless you are well versed in this section, because navigating through that could be a pain mentally and financially otherwise.
Yeah, the other thing that we could do, Tim, for the legal aspect is promo Ted Limas. He's our Amazon attorney that helps us with a lot of different legal matters. Would you mind pulling up his website real quick?
Sure.
tedlawfirm.com. And he is very well versed in all aspects of Amazon from a legal perspective. Fantastic to work with. And that's tedlawfirm.com. And Tim, is the phone number up at the top, or there it is, 626-993-7000. Located in Pasadena, California. He's worked with several of our clients and is really well versed in a lot of the legal aspects and could probably give you some insight into some of these different legal concerns that we brought up in this presentation. In fact, we could probably do a whole webinar on just this piece with him. And I think we're scheduled to have him on, is it next week or in a couple weeks?
Tentatively next week. We still need to confirm some details, but yes, the goal is to get him on for next week.
Right, but we've had him on before for different legal matters pertaining to Amazon. So you could check out our Amazon page, and there's the one webinar that we did with Ted where your communication with Amazon is dysfunctional, get over it. And that's a great webinar to watch. We have another one coming up with him pertaining to counterfeit items and violations of IP, intellectual property, copyright, and all that on Amazon too. But wanted to just throw that in there since we're talking about the legal aspect. But Tim, let's get on to the next slide, which is about the logistics, please.
Yes, logistics of selling on Amazon. Packaging, that's one big thing that you have to keep in mind, is that the packaging that is used in the UK or in the EU is very different. There are specific label requirements on for certain product categories, so you have to make sure you familiarize yourself with your specific categories requirements. Instructions should all be translated. So if you unlike in the US and France, US and Canada and Mexico, you pretty much just need to have 2 to 3 languages: English, Spanish, and French for Canada. But if you are over in the UK or in the EU, it's those plus German, plus Swedish, plus any of the other Eastern European languages, and Italian and Portuguese. I mean, there's a lot of different languages that you need to make sure you have in your instructions, and those all need to be translated in addition to the listings. You have to be really familiar with the international shipping, import, and customs process. And for this reason, it may actually be a better idea to partner with a company that specializes, that can manage the import process, manage the shipment process, and make sure that your product gets imported correctly from beginning to end. The next part is the storage and order handling. So if you don't plan on doing FBA, the things that you have to keep in mind are that you have to choose if it's going to be done by yourself, by a third party, or like I said, Amazon themselves. If you do have to do the order handling yourself or by a third party, you have to make sure that you or they are familiar with being able to ship to the various locations that they all need to go, that the shipments need to go to. Then the last thing is the product returns. As Blake had mentioned before, if you use the FBA program and you need to recall product to yourself, or if a customer needs to return product to you, you cannot have it returned to a U.S. address. So it's very important that you have an EU address that the customer can ship returns to. And this is not only for retail items, but also I'm trying to read my notes here. If it's a suppose, then I'm sorry, I was reading my notes wrong here. It's just really important to make sure that you do have a EU address that customers can return products to, and yeah, that's really the big deal.
Essentially, it goes to Amazon. Amazon is not going to pay the insane shipping cost to return or just, well, it's not disposing because they can dispose it. That's one of your only options. But just if you think about it from a zoomed out perspective, it would just cost Amazon too much money out of their pocket to ship it to the United States for a return. So that's why you need to have your own kind of logistics set up in Europe. But you can have your items refurbished, resold through Amazon, or you could again find a different route to sell your products. Or if you want to ship your products back to the U.S. at your own dime after it comes to one of your facilities that you've set up in Europe, you can do that. So just something to definitely keep in mind when it comes to, let's say, very high ticket items. If you're an electronic manufacturer and you want to sell some sort of expensive electronic over there, you need to keep this in mind. Whereas something that might cost you something very low to produce, it's not going to hurt you to dispose of it for a return.
Great, thank you, Blake. All right, so that covers the 4 L's. Before I move into my last section of where do I start, are there any other questions or comments?
Not at this time. Let's get into the next slide.
All right, so
we got 8 minutes left, Tim.
All right, we can definitely do this. All right, so Tim, this sounds fantastic. Loved what you said. I want to start selling in Europe. So where do I start? All right, well, first thing you want to do is decide what country will be your home marketplace. This is where you're going to be your center of operations. And a couple things that you'll want to kind of take into consideration when choosing your home marketplace are look at the FBA export reports. You can actually pull up reports in Seller Central in the US and get some detailed information about how to have, what's involved with getting that product over to the EU. So look to see which countries may have demand for your particular product. That will help guide you where you want to go. We oftentimes recommend that you actually start with the UK first, then Germany, and then France. Those are the 3 largest marketplaces in the EU. UK is really the most logical first option, just because the language barrier is not a real big issue. Aside from that, you always want to as an ongoing basis, you want to kind of review what kind of competition you have in each of these marketplaces for your particular item, and relevancy for that particular category. Let's say if you wanted to sell snow skis, and there's not too many snowy mountains in the UK, but there sure are a lot in Germany towards the south. So Italy as well. Those might be better locations to maybe start selling that particular product as opposed to the UK. So just a couple of things to kind of keep in mind when you decide on which marketplace you want to start with. Next thing is which fulfillment option is going to work best for you. We went over all those 5 different fulfillment options, and we want to make sure to point out too that you can mix and match. You're not, it's not like a one, you have to do the same option for every single product that you sell. You can decide, okay, this product I want to do Pan-European, but this particular product I want to do MCI, multi-country inventory, because I know that the product is going to be better in this country than the other ones. So you can actually decide product by product where the product is going to, or which fulfillment option you want to use.
Pretty tricky.
Oh yeah. So okay, now that you know kind of the logistics and know what you want to do, next step is to make sure you review local laws for your particular products and for the categories that you want to sell in. So that's everything from making sure that you understand labeling laws, make sure that you know all the different European consumer rights, all that stuff. Next thing is that you really want to consult a tax advisor. Make sure you know that you're going to get the taxes and the VAT all set up correctly in the countries that you want to start with. Next, you want to review international shipping companies. So we said before, to handle logistics because of the complexity of the process, it may be better to hire a company to take care of it with you. So you want to, if that's something that you want to do, you want to start figuring out who is going to be a good fit for your company to get your shipment over there. Once you get all that figured out, then it's time to start opening up your EU seller account to get started. It's one of those things where you want to make sure you have all your ducks in a row before you even start trying to get your product listed. Because if you don't, if something's not going to work out right, and you spent all that time setting up the listings on your Amazon accounts, really does not work well. And of course, you want to make sure that you add your listings and that you translate and localize all the information on each of those listings and all the different marketplaces.
I imagine if you start doing a whole bunch of different things wrong, you're going to get hit with all sorts of fees as well.
Oh, yeah.
For every little thing that you do wrong, which is typical of any Amazon marketplace. So that's why not only having your ducks in a row to be organized is important before you get started, but there is the consequence that it will cost you money because you're doing it wrong. And if you do it wrong and you sent in all your products wrong and they're hitting you with fees, then they could lock up all your inventory, lock up all your money, suspend your account, and all sorts of other things could happen as a result of just not doing it right the first time. So getting organized is really important, not only from making the experience a very pleasurable one, but also from the standpoint it's not going to cost you a whole bunch of money either.
I did want to point out that we're not here to scare you off either. A lot of times they might enforce fees, but a lot of times they'll give you warnings as well, though. They'll just say, hey, look, this item needed to be labeled a certain way, or you didn't put this translation. I'm looking at a bag of almonds right now, and it has 6 different languages on it. Almonds come from the United States, but I mean, there's 6 languages stuffed on every side of the package. But yes, there are fees, but don't let it scare you off, because it is a huge marketplace with a lot of potential.
The key here is due diligence.
Yes.
Look into what you're getting into before you just dive in. It's funny, Tim said to me before, I'm a ready, fire, aim guy, where I just want to get something going. And that makes sense for certain circumstances, but when you get into something bigger like this, you want to really do your due diligence to make sure you at least got most of your bases covered before you dive in the pool of piranhas. Just kidding. All right, Tim, what's the next item?
So next obvious step, after you have everything all set up correctly in your seller accounts, send inventory over to the EU. Once again, partnering with whoever you decide to choose in step 5. And lastly is you want to make sure you provide excellent customer service to your buyers. It's a very important step that I think some people, once they get everything all up and listed, they just kind of forget about it and just let the money train start rolling. But you got to keep on top of it. You got to provide that great customer service. It's a very important aspect to the Amazon ecosystem.
Great presentation, Tim. Very informative. I'm sure a lot of folks will be watching the recording of this. We'll be sending it to a lot of people who are asking us, hey, I want to get started on all the Amazon marketplaces at once all over the world. And one of the reasons why I tell people not to jump in all the way on every single marketplace is because, as you can see, the more marketplaces that you're in, the more administrative stuff you have to do. And there's plenty of money to make here in the United States. And of course, there's plenty of money to make there as well. But really get good at doing one and then add the next one. That's what we really recommend. But that being said, thank you for joining us. Tim, pull up our website one more time.
Absolutely. Give me just a moment.
That's awesomedynamic.com. You can reach out to our director of sales, Terry Levin, who usually is joining us. His email address is terry@awesomedynamic.com. You can also reach us by phone, and that phone number is 800-231-1811. And of course, on our website, I'm sorry, that's 238-1811, not 231. So 800-238-1811. Terry's email address, terry@awesomedynamic.com. Our website, of course, is awesomedynamic.com. You can sign up for our awesome list, sign up for our webinars, which we do every single Thursday at 12:30 Central. If you enjoyed this content, again, we ask you to leave us a 5-star review. You can scroll down to the bottom of our website. There's a button there for Review Us. Hit the thumbs up. Leave us a review on Google or on Facebook, whichever is more convenient for you. We would really appreciate that. Thank you for joining us today. And like everybody say, goodbye and ciao. Even Blake, who is just sitting down right now as I'm stalling until he puts his headphones in, we're just saying goodbye, Blake. So say goodbye.
Sayonara.
Adios.
Adios.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.